Hello there. Just wanted to do an old man of the sea story. Yeah, there's a book by Hemingway, isn't there, with the same title. That's where I got my inspiration from. Anyway, I want to talk about emergency situations. Now, I have been in a few emergency situations. My first one was when I was a cadet at sea on my first or second trip to sea. It was on a gas tanker, and we were in a place called Pascagoula in the United States of America. Anyway, I went ashore along with the second engineer and third mate. We went, had a nice time ashore. Went to a shopping mall, bought some CDs, as you do, and we went back via a bar. This bar was next to a motel, which will become apparent why I mention it in a minute. Yeah, we went, had a few beers in this bar. Going back in those days, there wasn't so much stigma attached to drinking, and of course we had a few scoops of beer, as you do. Anyway, we come to go home about 10 o'clock. We stood outside this bar, trying to flag down a taxi. Anyway, all these fire engines started to rush by, so we started looking around, and up in the distance we could see all these flames licking up into the sky, and obviously being reflected by the clouds. Anyway, as we got back to the docks, we were told that we couldn't go in because of the fire, and I said, but our ship's over there. Anyway, the fire chief turned up just as we were just about to turn around and go back, and the fire chief said, oh well, I'll take them to their ship. Anyway, as we got closer, as we got is it finished as we got closer to the ship, we started to smell this ammonia gas. Ammonia gas isn't very nice. It's pretty toxic stuff. But anyway, as we got back, we could smell this ammonia gas, and the fire chief stopped us in our taxi and said, look, you can't come any closer. It's not safe. So we turned round and we went back to that bar that we'd had a few beers at, and we booked 3 rooms in this little tiny the motel that was attached to the bar, and we spent a nice quiet night having a peaceful sleep. Anyway, we turned up next morning back at the wharf where our ship had been, and it turns out that the ship that was between where our ship was and the shore had caught fire. It had been loading petrol, but it already had a cargo full of diesel, which caught fire and exploded, and they lifted this thing out of the water and broke its back, and obviously it spilled its contents of diesel, which then caught fire and spread out across the sea. But what we could see when we turned back up to the wharf was all the concrete had crumbled away and was just left with the steel supports. The pipe work that ran across underneath the roadway of this wharf had all melted and started, doing the saggy stuff. And our ship had gone out to anchor. But yeah, that was a complete panicky moment there. The chief engineer that we had was Chinese, and his parents had gone to India to give birth to him so that he could get a British passport so we could come to England. Anyway, he got a job as a chief engineer, but as a chief engineer, it's your job to take the ship out in and out of port. That's probably the only job he does have. But he panicked, and he went and stood out by the lifeboat. He was demanding that the crew lower the lifeboat so we could go away, leaving the first engineer and the fourth engineer to take the ship out. But because of all the ammonia in the atmosphere, they couldn't stay in the control room. There wasn't a control room, it was a platform. Anyway, they couldn't stay on the control platform. So the first engineer went and got all the breathing apparatus, all the spare BA bottles, and kept them with him on the control platform, and swapped them out as and when he needed them. You get about 30 minutes on a bottle of air. So anyway, he had about 8 bottles. So they then took the ship out and went to anchor. But anyway, we got we were in the morning. We managed to get a lift, one of these crew transfer vessels, to the oil rigs. He said, I'm going out that way. I'll take you. So he took us out to our boat, and we all climbed up. Oh, I've got to go. Phone. That was someone at the door collecting a parcel. Bring you a bit closer. There we go. Right. That was the first time really that I learnt that panicking does not help any situation. The other emergency situation was I was working in a workshop. I had my head down, as you do, working on the bench, overhauling some injectors, and the motorman was having to cut up an old workbench that we'd taken out of the purifier room. This workbench was covered in old, thick tar like fuel oil, and it was going to be cut up and made as scrap. Obviously this thing's quite big and bulky, and you can't really lift it out the engine room, so he cut it up into smaller chunks so it could carry it out the engine room easier. But anyway, as he was cutting this bench up with an oxyacetylene torch, we'll call it a gas axe, as he was using a gas axe to cut it up, this oil caught fire and started to produce all this black smoke. Anyway, I lifted my head up for a breather from this job I was on, and I lifted my head up into a cloud of smoke. What the hell's going on here? Turned round, and there's this guy busy cutting up this table with the gas axe, and it's on fire. It wasn't a very big fire, but it was just enough to put out clouds of black smoke. And obviously our workshop is a hot workspace, so we didn't have any smoke detectors. It was what we had was heat detectors. This rapid rate of increase in temperature sets the alarm off. Anyway, that's beside the point. So anyway, I tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Here, you're on fire, mate." And he panicked. He dropped everything and legged it. Anyway, I thought, where's he going? So I went over to the sink and got a cup of water, and I threw this cup of water over the flames, and that put the fire out. Anyway, about 2 or 3 minutes later, he'd come back with a fire extinguisher. So, "Where the hell have you been?" I said. He said, "I went to get a fire extinguisher, blah, 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 blah." Oh, okay then. But I said, "Why didn't you use the fire extinguisher that was right next to you? The one that you'd put there in case you caught fire?" Oh, he says, I panicked. Yeah, so he panicked. Anyway, problem averted. The next example of not to panic was we were doing some ballasting on a ship. I wasn't involved in the ballasting. I was working on a generator. I was stood on top of the generator looking down at this this character come to do the ballasting. Anyway, he opened the main ship's side valve for the sea, so the sea was coming into the sea chest, and then he opened up a big valve to the ballast pump, and as he opened that valve up to the ballast pump, so the bottom of it just collapsed. There was a huge, really massive section of this valve just dropped out onto the floor, and I've never seen so much water come into a ship. But what was the most amazing thing was that this guy had panicked. He actually ran round in circles. I've never seen anyone do a headless chicken act like that before, where he ran round in circles. And anyway, I went down to see him. We'll call him Eric, just to save embarrassment. I said to Eric, I said, "What have you done?" I said, "I'm ballasting." I said, What was the last valve you opened?" I said, "That one. One with all the water coming out of it." Well, I said, "There was no point shutting that one because it's broken." So we went then, we followed him back through it. I said, "Right, let's shut the last valve that you opened, and then we'll continue going. We'll work our way backwards until we get to anyway, we got back, we started shutting that. Anyway, the first valve that we shut stopped the water from flooding into the ship, and it was just a matter of using the oily water separator after that to get rid of it was several tons of seawater coming. A lot of water. Anyway, but yeah, that's another example. It's just don't panic. Do the things that you need to do, but don't panic. That's some of the stories that you hear and the lectures that you get given. It's people who panic cause the most danger. Where people that keep their heads can quite often save the situation. Where if you get a fuel leak and that catches fire, and it's in front of you, is to shut the fuel off. If it's a gas leak, shut the gas off. And or in one particular case, on one of the passenger ships that had caught fire, this guy had taken a panel off to inspect the fuel pumps, and he noticed that there was a fuel leak. So he panicked and left the fuel cover off. If he'd put the cover back on, then the leaking fuel wouldn't have caught fire, because as the leak got worse and worse, it sprayed a jet of fuel that went from one engine across to the other running engine, which caught fire. And that was a big panicky thing there. If he reacted carefully, thinking, well, if I put the cover back on, it might not stop the leak, but it will stop the fuel from spraying further afield. But yeah, that's one of the things that you should do, is not panic. Any emergency situation is not to panic. I remember my dear old dad. He bought this new car, and went out for a drive, as you did when petrol was cheap. You could afford to go out and have a little jolly, couldn't you? But yeah, anyway, his car started to smoke. As we got to a junction, he noticed there was smoke coming out from underneath the bonnet. So that was it. We all bailed out the car, and I said, as he got out, I said, let's open the bonnet up so we can have a look. And he was, no, just calm down, just open the bonnet. Anyway, so as he got out the car, he released the bonnet catch, and we lifted it up, and we could see that it was a fuse that had started to burn out a wire. So it wasn't such a big issue. We managed to fix it in the end at the side of the road. But yeah, it's another case of don't panic. And that's what I found in a lot of situations. Oh, sorry about that. My GoPro overheated. Never had that before. Anyway, as I was saying, it's if you ever get into an emergency situation, it's not to panic, and just do the right thing. And what I will say is that the training exercises that you may or may not have experienced, they'll help you to not to panic. Like I say, it's one of those things where situations can get out of control really quickly if you don't do the right things. I was in a blackout once. This is Marine Scotland again, and we're in a blackout. The chief engineer decided he was going to poo himself. Yes, the chief engineer actually did, not just once, but twice. Now, when we got into port, and we tied up, and the main generator had gone off, and we were running on the harbour set, and the harbour set decided to break down about 10 minutes afterwards. It was taking the full ship's power, and of course the chief engineer, I just can't believe it. He pooed himself. He absolutely pooed himself, and in the control room, and I said to him, I said, can you go and get changed, because it's just disgusting. So anyway, he went off to get changed, as I was. I put on the generator that had just come off, and restored the power that way. And of course, by the time he'd come back with a clean boiler suit, I discovered that what had happened with the emergency, the harbour set generator, the oil supply pump had sheared. The drive for it had sheared, so the pump wasn't turning, supplying lube oil to the engine. But yeah, and the second time that we blacked out again, we had a standby engine that we could put on. The ship was in no danger, because we had tied up, uh, but it was just one of those things that the generator that we were running had just tripped, and these things happen. But instantly, the ship's power management system puts the second generator back on and restores the power that way. And if that doesn't happen, then the emergency generator will kick in and give us emergency power, which gives us light to see what we're doing. But yeah, there's absolutely no need to panic. I don't know if any of you know what emergency systems we have on board ship, but we have emergency batteries that provide all the lighting on the ship so that you can see what you're doing. If you're trapped in one of these spaces, some emergency lights will come on. They've either got their own power supply, or they've got fed from a main battery on deck somewhere. The next step that we have is an emergency generator, which will automatically start in the event of a blackout. That will put itself on the board, and that supplies some basic emergency equipment. It will supply a steering gear, but it won't provide enough power to run the ship at all. It will give you steering, and obviously give you radio equipment, lighting, some cooling systems, or fresh water systems as well. So if you're in an emergency, you need a drink of water. So you might get, if you haven't got an emergency supply for fresh water, there'll be a hand pump somewhere just to get the fresh water out so you can have a drink. The last thing you want to do is become dehydrated in an emergency situation. Anyway, I've waffled on. So hopefully I shall be able to tag this bit onto the bit that my camera overheated. I've never had an overheating camera before. It's not like it's even hot out here either, is it? But anyway, but yeah, it's rather still and no air movement. Anyway, so I'll cobble this together and see what we can get. Okay, see ya. Bye then.